listening to the Philanthropisms podcast with Rodri Davis.
Hello, you're listening to the Philanthropisms podcast. This is the podcast where we try to put philanthropy in context. I'm your host, as ever, Rodri Davis, and this week we are in conversation, and it's with Lisa Greer. Now, Lisa is herself a philanthropist and major donor, but also somebody who, over the years, has become very interested in the whole business of fundraising and what works about it and what potentially doesn't work. And as such, she's written a number of books. She wrote a book a few years ago called Philanthropy Revolution, and more recently, she wrote a book called The Essential Fundraisers Handbook, which is the kind of centerpiece of what I sat down to talk to Lisa about. And she also coaches fundraisers and talks to audiences of fundraisers and donors about fundraising and philanthropy all the time. So I sat down with Lisa fairly recently, as I say, to talk to her about the book and also her kind of wider work. So we talked a bit about what the backdrop was to the new book, and what had led her to write it, and what she sort of hoped that people took from it, and what the reaction had been so far. We talked a bit about lots of the ideas in the book. For instance, one of the big themes is about the importance of seeing fundraising as a relationship-based practice, and whether fundraising as a profession has become perhaps maybe too reliant on particular tools and models rather than those sort of deeper or sometimes softer skills of relationship building, and whether that was in part a reflection of a desire to sort of professionalize fundraising but in a particular way, and whether the reward and incentive structures within fundraising departments and within the profession as a whole maybe made it harder for fundraisers to focus on long-term relationship building even when they want to do that. We talked quite a bit about the question of sort of gratitude and thanks, and how you get that balance as a fundraiser between saying thank you to a donor at whatever level, and that sort of natural human instinct to express gratitude when somebody does offer you a gift, and making sure that you don't then tip over into sort of fawning or obeisance towards donors, and how that also relates to some of the expectations donors might have about other forms of recognition, such as naming rights, and whether we need to distinguish a bit more between the sort of basic idea of thanking and some of those slightly more controversial ideas around donor recognition. We also talked about whether things might be changing quite significantly in certain areas as a result of a new generation of donors emerging, both the sort of younger generation as a result of this kind of great wealth transfer that we're constantly told that we're on the cusp of, but also because there are just more donors out there who perhaps represent historically marginalized communities or kind of women donors, and slowly fundraisers and non-profits are starting to realize that they are a potentially huge kind of untapped market for many of them. And we talked a bit about whether they were different in their attitudes or in what they wanted to get out of fundraising relationships. We also talked about some of the sort of specific tools of fundraising and whether, those were still relevant in this day and age. Particularly, we talked about the idea of sort of non-profit galas and big black tie events, and differing views on whether those are useful or appropriate, and how perhaps non-profits can use them appropriately in some cases, but where they might want to evaluate whether they're actually worth using. And we also talked about the fact that Lisa, in addition to being very keen on fundraising as a relationship-based activity, is also actually very in favour of recurring donations and sort of regular donations as something that kind of gets people into the habit of giving, and how you might join the dots between that seemingly more passive activity and the more active involvement that people might have further down the line, or whether it makes them more amenable to additional fundraising asks in the future. We also talked about donor advised funds, why they had become somewhat controversial, and whether actually there was something to be said for the role of fundraisers in providing people opportunities to give more out of DAFs that could overcome some of the concerns about money becoming warehoused in those DAFs. And then we also talked about the current debates between donor-centric and community-centric approaches to fundraising, and whether that dynamic was being somewhat overstated, and whether there was actually more of a middle ground that perhaps both sides could agree on and profitably move forward. So without further ado, let's get into the conversation. I hope you enjoy it. I found it really interesting, and I will be back at the end for the usual bit of housekeeping and updates. Okay, great. Well, I'm here with Lisa Greer. Hi there, Lisa.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm really good, thank you. Yeah, great to have a chance to talk. Really looking forward to talking. And I guess the focus of the conversation is your book, or still relatively new book, The Essential Fundraisers Handbook. And I want to sort of talk about lots of things that are in that. But maybe the best place to start is just for you to say a bit in your own words about what the book's about and what it was that led you to write it.
Great. My background is that I was raised very much in sort of a middle-class household in Los Angeles, where the word philanthropy was not used. Not because it was a bad word, but because it meant sort of people with putting on airs and that kind of thing. And our giving was really local and kind of to the school and to the Girl Scouts and those kinds of things. And so we kind of continued that way. And I obviously gave money when I could, but we certainly were not on anybody's list of donors and of regular donors. So many years later, and my husband was raised in Canada in a similar situation. And it was all fine. But all of a sudden we found that we were about to become extremely wealthy. And we were really worried about it, excited, but also worried. We didn't want to turn into, those people who were not very nice people. We didn't want our kids to be negatively impacted. So we were very nervous about all of that. And when we and we're waiting for this IPO to happen, and happen or not happen, and we're just wondering, like, what is our new life going to be like, and how do we do well in that? And so we decided that we would find really sit down and try and decide what we wanted to give to as our first charitable donation. And it didn't occur to me at that point that everybody who had money didn't have that conversation, which I've since found out, unfortunately, that's not the case. But I just thought, well, okay, we'll just figure out where we want to give money. And why don't we do this sort of pie in the sky thing and say, hey, if we have any amount of money we want, where would we want to give it? Like, what's most important to us? And so we sat down and we each came up with an idea together. And this was about 10 days before the IPO, so before this whole thing was going to happen. And we said, and so I said to my husband, let's do this. It'll feel really good. And also there's a little bit of a, deal with God thing in there. I hope this happens, because if we make this really great charitable thing and promise. So we said, okay, we didn't even know the language of fundraising at all. And so I said, where are we going to give our first, I didn't even say gift, I said our first donation. And so he went first, and he's had something called Crohn's disease for a very long time. And so not surprisingly, he said, well, I'd like to find out where the best research is being done anywhere, ideally somewhere in the US on Crohn's disease, to try and make sure that nobody has to go through what I went through, and that ideally there's some sort of cure. So I said, okay, fine. We had no idea where to go. And I said, I'll just call the hospital where you've had your surgeries, and we'll see if we can find out who's doing the best research. I'm happy to do a research project. So he said, fine. And so he said, what do you want to do? And I'm the incoming chair at our synagogue in Los Angeles. And I was really about to take over a few months after that. And we had a capital campaign going on. And the only reason I knew it was called a capital campaign is because we had a consultant who was working there who had told us it's called a capital campaign. And we were redoing our sanctuary and renovating it. And so there was $1 million left to be raised on the capital campaign. And I said, well, I like checking things off lists. So I said, well, wouldn't it be great if I could have that checked off the list when I start my tenure as chair, and know that I don't have to worry about immediately going out and raising that extra $1 million to finish the campaign. So we said, so Josh said, okay, fine. If that's what you want to do, that's great. And so I called the person at the synagogue who ran the whole thing. And I said, I just want to let you know that assuming this thing happens in 10 days, we are going to give you the final $1 million for the capital campaign. And at that point, I never thought those words would ever come out of my mouth in my lifetime, because, you just don't think you're going to say that. But but more surprised. So I got it out, and then I don't know what I expected, but I expected somewhere between, sort of like you've won the lottery or something like that, screaming and whatever, or something. And I got nothing. There was no response. And I said, "Excuse me, are you there?" And she said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, did you hear what I said?" And she said, "Yes, I did." And she says, "But I don't know what to say." And I said, "Well, I guess you could say thank you." And she said, "Well, I don't know if I can because I didn't make an ask." And that's when I thought, what world did I just get into? This is crazy, where people don't just say thank you. Like, what is that? So, and I don't blame her, because she was trained in that way. I mean, as many, probably hundreds of thousands of fundraisers are trained that way. And still, as of today, let me tell you what happened at the end of that. So I hang up the phone. Neither of us, she doesn't say thank you. And then the phone rings again. And I think, oh, okay, she was just a little shocked. And so she's calling back to say thank you. And instead, when I picked up the phone, she said, "Can I talk to your husband?" And I put my husband on the line, and he's saying, like, "What's going on?" And she said to him, "Do you have any idea what your wife is doing?" And that, in addition, made me think, I'm in some very strange place that I don't understand. And so we found over time that those were not unusual situations, especially when somebody decides to start giving who hasn't been known as a donor. And so that became a really big deal for us to understand that we weren't on the list. We weren't on their official list of donors. We don't get to be donors because, and of course, fundraisers are always saying, "We want you to come in, we want you to give." But because we didn't, and because we started with these two gifts that we went out to find, we were proactive about it. The fundraisers didn't, and the organizations didn't know what to do with us. And I find that still the situation today. Many, if not most, gifts that are just sort of like, they just come from nowhere, from your website or from wherever, unsolicited gifts are treated as something suspect. And I understand that there are people who we should have some degree of concern about that, but not for everybody, and not to the point where, and that's a very small percentage of people who are bad actors. So the people who are just wanting to give because we see something online, I mean, that's why we have websites, and that's why we do information, so that somebody might say, "Hey, we'd like to give." We shouldn't be so cautious that we're making those people feel like they shouldn't be giving. And what happens with that is, right now we're in a situation where there's lots and lots of younger people who have not been givers or donors forever. And if they decide that they want to give a gift because they hear about something interesting and they get that kind of response, I'm very, very concerned that they will stop trying, and they'll just put their money away somewhere, and they won't give anymore because they'll think, this is a crazy business and I don't think I need to be here. So that's how this all started.
Yeah, really interesting. Lots I want to pick up on in there. And I guess the first thing to say is it's odd in a way, your experience there, because it sounds like for most organizations, it's their fairy tale is, actually somebody's just found their website and turns up and wants to give them lots of money without them having to go out looking for it. But I guess they're so conditioned in a way, or it just doesn't fit within the mindset that maybe it's hard to deal with. I guess the two things I immediately wanted to pick up on were, I think, key themes of your book that relate to that. One is about the ability to say thank you and the whole role of sort of gratitude and recognition. And then the other one is about the profession of fundraising and whether sometimes that kind of acts against just dealing with things, in the way that you would assume people sort of normally do. I guess taking that latter one first, you touched on it there, but do you think that one of the challenges here is that, you're very clear that you think that fundraising should be something that's about relationship building and sort of relationship management, particularly when you're talking about kind of engaging philanthropists. But do you think that the way that the fundraising profession has gone, it's become too reliant on the tools that they used rather than sort of the deeper skills of relationship building?
Yes, and so yes, I think that the rules make sense to a certain point. But first of all, those rules were created. Beth Breeze, who most people I think there know, she actually traced this to the beginning of the 20th century, where a lot of these rules about the ask and the procedural rules were actually created then and really haven't changed much in about 100 years, which is crazy because it's very difficult to find anything that hasn't changed in 100 years. But these rules have pretty much stayed the same. And when you ask nonprofits, why do you do it that way? Because, I, of course, had that objectivity to say, I don't understand why you do that. That doesn't make sense to me. They'll say the reason they almost always say is because it's always been done that way. And that's not a good answer, right? So, but what's happened is that structure has become so specifically defined. And I think with the lack of resources that most nonprofits have, they don't have enough resources generally to say, well, let's look into that. Instead, they just say, we have to keep going. We have to raise money. We have to do this right now. We don't have time to think about it. And so they keep perpetuating these norms that I don't think make any sense anymore. And they might make sense for older donors who've done it the same way forever, but that's a very, very small part of our population, or the people that understand that. This is, let's say, the larger donors who are 80 years older or more. Many of them are just used to it being done this way, where you say, you have a meeting with them once a year, you do a little tap dance, you tell them what you're doing, and they give you a check, and then you leave and you come back the next year. That seems to be the norm, and that will not work with most donors today at all. And so I think that those rules and the tactics used have become not only outdated, but they're actually offensive to a lot of newer donors.
And do you think that part of the challenge is that for organizations, even if they recognize that in an ideal world, what they should be doing is kind of trying to develop long-term relationships, even if they won't necessarily result in significant donations in the immediate short term, the challenge is that they kind of have financial pressures that mean that they feel like they need to focus more on the immediate short term and things, kind of the low hanging fruit. And then that filters down to the incentives that individual fundraisers have, which are not really about relationship building very often. They're more about bring in this amount of money in this kind of set period of time.
Yeah, that's right. And it's a big problem. I think the problem comes from leadership, but a lot of it also comes from boards. And there's this idea of, we don't have time to have this discussion. Just go get the check and come back. Go get the money and come back. And that's it. And if you don't come back, then sorry. And it's really demeaning towards the fundraiser. And most of the fundraisers that I speak to, especially the younger ones, really want to have those relationships. They want to, it's funny. My daughter works for a company that works with a lot of small retail outlets in Los Angeles, and she wants to go visit them. And she works for a very large company, and the company said, you're not allowed to do that. And she said, well, if I'm talking to them and I'm selling to them, shouldn't I be able to go and meet with them and learn about them? And they said, we don't have time for that. And so I got the same response recently. I had a fundraiser come up to me and she said, I don't know what to do. I was just told by my boss, and said, look, I listened to Lisa's thing and whatever, and I read the book, and I'm very, I would like to create a relationship and go talk to them. And she said, we do not have time for, just like you just said, we have no time for that. We don't have the resources for that. Just go get the money. And it is so short-sighted, not in a pie in the sky kind of way, but was short-sighted in terms of how long donors stay with organizations. And if you create a relationship, you might not get the money the first year. You might get it the second year. You might get it 18 months into it. You might get it longer. But then those people will stay with you. And so over a period of time, not even a large amount of time, those people will stay with you longer. And it's a relationship. It's not this one-time thing. And so when we find that about 4 out of every 5 donors who give the first time don't give a second time, it's pretty clear that's a problem. And our churn rate in the sector is way, way below anybody else's, or I guess it's much worse than any other sector, because I've actually compared that to other sectors. And it's crazy. It's like something has to be happening for people not to want to come back, give the money at the beginning and then not to want to come back. And I think the reason for that is this idea that just someone's there just to get the money and run. And I think donors feel that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's probably, it's not a pleasant feeling to be in that position of feeling as though that's the basis of the relationship. I guess one of the challenges as well, maybe from the wider perception of this, is that when you say, actually, it should be about relationship building, for some people, they immediately go to a caricature that is then, smaller nonprofit organizations having to spend a large amount of time kind of meeting the needs and the desires of donors when they're not sure whether that's going to pay off. But in practical terms, then, what would you say good relationship management should look like that manages to balance putting time and resources into it, but not spending all of your time doing that as a nonprofit?
Yeah, well, I think that it's a great question. I think that people overthink this, and this idea that you have to be with them face to face. You have to have a meal. That's just really archaic at this point. Some people like that, but a lot of people don't. And most nonprofits I talk to will not allow their fundraisers to ask for money over Zoom. And I think that's crazy. I'm happy to not have to put on pants, and wear my pajamas and whatever, and not have to go to this, go sit and have a lunch with somebody because just for them to ask me for money. I would rather spend time with my family or, doing something else. And that has not, surprisingly, that feeling is not shared by most other nonprofits. They really do believe that, well, we've done it and it worked, so we're just going to keep doing it that way. And I think if you ask the donors, how would you like to be, spoken with, and would you like us to have these conversations virtually or in person or over coffee or whatever, people will tell you what they want. And you'll also find that a lot of them are just fine being asked in whatever way you want it to be. So we've got this sort of crash of and conflict of different kind of generational kinds of things, but also even if you take the generational out of it of who we're talking to from the fundraiser perspective, it's just old rules that don't make sense in modern society.
And I guess that also links to the other thing that I wanted to pick up on first, which is around this question of how you say thank you when you have got a donation, which is it's sort of an interestingly quite a sort of contentious point, because again, you say, actually, if somebody gives you a large amount of money as a donor, it seems natural to say thank you. But then there's a certain resistance to that, because for some people it implies that, that it's being demanded of them, or that it kind of inappropriately is asking the nonprofit to be sort of supplicant and that sort of thing. But again, if somebody does give you a large amount of money, the natural human response is just as a person is to show gratitude. So again, how do nonprofits do that in a way that is kind of healthy and productive and kind of make sure that the relationship is a good one?
Right. So this is one of those issues where the pendulum has swung too far in the other direction, with this idea that you don't say thank you. As far as I'm concerned, that's just good manners. And you're taught as a baby to say thank you. You're taught at probably 18 months old to say thank you. So the idea that there's this power thing and you can't say thank you anymore, that for donors, it doesn't feel good at all. And I think for fundraisers, it also feels awkward. So that's just a basic thing. Hello, say hello. What, you should not say hello to them when you walk in a room? I mean, that's just crazy. So I think that has been taken to an extreme with the pendulum going to this other direction of, oh, well, you have to say things the right way. Now, then there's an extreme version of that. Though just the words thank you, I think, should always be there. The idea of pandering to a donor because they are giving you money at whatever amount of money. And by the way, the thank you should be said if they give you 50 cents, a kid gives it out of their pocket. It doesn't matter. You say thank you all the time. And I think that's human nature and most people do that. But sitting and saying, well, there's a power dynamic, I can't, that's really going into another area that doesn't even fit. And it's ignoring personal feelings and relationships and how people think and how people feel. But the idea when somebody says, well, I want it this way and I want you to thank me with a brass band, I think that's a little ridiculous unless you happen to have a brass band nearby. But I think that it also shouldn't be in relation to how much money they give. So it's people give different amounts of money. And if somebody clearly has really focused and honed in on your cause and your mission and your organization and wants to know everything about it and really wants to be part of it, let them. Why would you not let them? So, and you can say thank you to them. And I think we have to get this idea of don't say thank you. I think that needs to just die, frankly.
And yeah, I think you've touched on it there, but just to sort of nail a point home. So, is it partly that we need to distinguish a lot more clearly between the idea of just saying thank you and expressing gratitude, which is kind of natural and human, and the wider question of kind of donor recognition and naming rights? Because it does feel as though they do get tied together and actually they're relatively sort of separate things.
Yeah, so that's a very fraught concept, and I'm actually working with a couple of clients on that right now. One of them wants to be very egalitarian, and they would they're doing a very major capital campaign, and they don't want to name buildings after people. They think that that's not right. And I've also talked to other people though who also want things to be egalitarian, and they've said we just have to. There are just some people who, if they want to give us an amount of money for a building, and it's 10 million or whatever it is, we really that's become a little bit of a standard, and we need to offer that. We don't need to push for that, but we need to offer it. And there's some other ways around it. I think I think both of them are right, and I do think that that not offering naming rights for large projects, I do think that that can be an impediment, or at least what it does, it reduces your donor group. I did hear a story the other day about somebody who paid whatever the amount was. Let's say it was $10 million to get a building, to have your name on a building. This person paid the $10 million. In this case, it was dollars, specifically to have a contract written up to say that nobody would have their name on that building. And that was great. I don't know who the person is. I haven't found him or her, but I thought that was awesome. I know that my brother did something once where they were going to put his name on a building and he really didn't want it. And they really wanted to have something that signified that somebody had given the money, and they put a poem on the building. So I think that's lovely. I think if somebody wants to do it in honor of someone, like let's say, it's, gosh, I guess that Harvard Library where the son died on the Titanic, and do you want to have something and have the name of your son? It's hard to determine how much of that is somebody being pushy or saying I'm better than you, and the opposite, which is just I really miss my kid and I would like to have my kid's name on something so people remember it. So I think we can look at it all of those different ways. I think when people demand it, I think that's getting into an area that I'm not comfortable with. I also think that somebody was talking to me about their donor wall the other day, and you can have a donor wall. It can be virtual or otherwise. But I do think that it's totally fine to have a list of people who've supported your organization. It doesn't have to say how much money they gave, though. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. And so what I recommend is that every fundraiser asks the donors that they're talking to how they like to be thanked. And everybody knows how they want to be thanked. And some people will just say, I just want it to be anonymous. I just feel good knowing it. And some people will say, I would love to just get a note from you at some point, an email. I just want to be acknowledged. I don't care in fact, most people I talk to say, I don't care what form the thank you's in. I just want it to be quick. I don't want to wait a month for it. And I agree with them. And it's the same thing. Like, let's say I take a cake over to somebody's home because they're in a bereavement situation and they're going to say thank you. So it's like, I don't, if it came a month later, I would think there's something strange with that. So I think a lot of this is just total common sense. And if we can focus a little bit more on common sense and realizing we're dealing with human beings, I think a lot of the specific rules will become clearer.
Yeah, absolutely. And just related to it in a way, I guess, because it's another area where maybe attitudes are shifting, but there's an element of it sort of, pragmatism about, does it work as a technique? In the book, you talk about non-profit galas as a means of fundraising, which I thought was really interesting because, again, some people have real reservations about them or kind of strong a negative reaction. But then lots of organizations still find them quite a valid way of fundraising. What are your thoughts on kind of, where things stand at the moment with them as a tool for fundraising and whether there are things to do, to avoid and things that you can do well?
Right. Well, although it sounds really horrible to say, I'm going to say it anyway, which is that the COVID pushed a lot of things into being, right? So there, and I'm not saying COVID was a good thing, but it did push some things into being, i.e. Zooms, right? And giving people that ability. So during COVID, a lot of organizations did these virtual galas and learned that as much as they wanted to believe that was a temporary fix, that they actually make sense. So I think that a gala, hybrid gala that's part in person and part virtual is lovely. I think all virtual galas are okay. It's hard to keep someone's attention usually. I think there's some rules around them, such as most virtual galas, I think, shouldn't be more than an hour or an hour and 15 minutes because people just don't have the attention to sit for that long. And I think that's totally fine. But the most important piece of information I have, a suggestion about galas, is to really stop talking about how much our gross revenue, and think about your net revenue. And I can't tell you how often I say to somebody, they'll say, oh, we made 10 million, whatever, a bunch of money at our gala. And I'll say, okay, so how much of that was net? And very often they'll say, we don't know. And that's a problem. If you don't know what the net was, then you shouldn't be doing the gala.
Yeah, absolutely. And it leads me on to another issue or another theme that's there in the book, which is you make, in various places, I think in relation to galas, for instance, you sort of say, actually, one of the things is that attitudes amongst a younger generation of donors might be very different. And so, might need to rethink it. And there are lots of other places where you talk about that as well. So, I mean, what impact do you think that this shift, particularly as we know we're kind of entering into this great wealth transfer where a whole new generation of people are going to come into wealth, and they probably are going to look very different from the stereotype that lots of organizations got of who is a donor. What does that going to mean for fundraising and for nonprofits?
Well, it depends on how the nonprofits behave. If the nonprofits decide to step up and say this is a new day and we need to, in fact, it was a new day 20 years ago and we should have been doing this, but now we're going to actually implement relationship-based fundraising. We're actually going to, the thing that I really counsel most nonprofits to do is look at every single thing that you do, every single thing. And if the answer, if one of the things you do is we have a gala every year in November. Why do you have a gala every year in November? Or whenever somebody asks a question, we send them to this person and this person. Or whenever somebody gives X amount of money, we give them this. And if they give them under this amount of money, if it's under this amount of money, we give them that. Look at every single one of those and say, why do we do that? And this is a really good time to do that, especially in the way you just put it was beautiful, having this huge amount of money now coming, as well as at the same time, having a society where lots of young people become wealthy at a very young age. So I think we just need to realize that that it's coming, it's here, and we're going to lose donors if we, in fact, will lose our organizations if we don't step up and say, why do we do this, and does it make sense for this generation? And so that can start with thank you. It can, but it definitely needs to include acknowledging that some people like galas, some people don't like galas. And the idea, but then what I hear back from people when I say that is, well, yeah, but donors always love galas. They like to get dressed up. And I find that incredibly offensive because you're a donor, you're automatically this person who likes to, I don't like that. When we gave our first large amount of money, I said to them, we will not continue this deal unless you, this transaction, I guess you can call it, because it felt like a transaction, but we will not continue it if you, unless you allow us up front, unless you agree that I'm trying to remember what we said, you agree that you will never push us to go to a gala because we really don't like them. And they think that's hilarious, but they, I don't even think it's funny. It's just like some people, everybody's different. Every donor's different. Every human being's different. And I realize what you said earlier about limited resources don't allow you to get to know every single donor, but there's very little tiny things you can do to get to know your donor that really take very little resources, where you can give the donor a feeling that you recognize them as an individual as opposed to as a, money bag.
Absolutely. And on that sort of younger generation, or the fact that there are these donors out there that maybe a lot of nonprofits are failing to connect with at the moment, do you think that's partly because they just don't have the understanding or the tools available, or do you think again it's partly because they sort of are thinking quite short term, or feel as though actually there's more merit in just focusing on what they see as where the money is at the moment, which is kind of an older generation of donors that they kind of know and understand, and at what point are they suddenly going to find that they fail to do the groundwork to build the relationships with?
Right. Well, you look at the churn rate, and you try to realize, well, if you get rid of all of the rules and you get these people in a room and you say, look, you're on this constant treadmill. You feel like you're on a constant treadmill, which they do, and 4 out of every 5 people that you bring in this year are not going to come back. So how does you have to go replenish them just to stay afloat? I don't actually know what's so difficult about understanding that, other than this idea that, yes, I hear you, but I don't have time to think about that. And if they don't have time to think about that, then they probably need to think about what's going to happen when they run out of money and they have to close down, and what's going to happen to their constituents and beneficiaries when that happens, because that's going to happen. They cannot rely on the, what I call it is the older white men, the 10 older white men who usually are supporting many, many organizations and certainly institutions we have here, that when they're gone, we know they're going to be gone. So when they are gone, you are not going to get the money. And therefore, what are you going to do? And at that point, if you've offended all sorts of incoming donors because you've treated them like crap, basically because they were too young or not on your list or whatever, then you're in deep trouble. So I think they have to really look at their organization. And it's not like you could say, well, we have no indicator of that. We raise this much money and we're raising the same amount of money every year. Okay, that's fine. But how much is it costing you to raise that amount of money? How long are your fundraisers staying with you? How, if you take what happens in 1 year and you take that out to 5 or 10 years, where are you going to be? Because your costs are going to go up. Your fundraisers are going to be less likely to stick around. And what are you going to do? So they just kind of need a little bit of a reality check, maybe very firmly and I think everybody top to bottom at those organizations, it usually is the senior leadership that is propagating this, what I call bad behavior.
And I guess linked to that, one of the things I wanted to ask was you mentioned again in the book that, there are plenty of fundraisers who get this and feel similarly and would like to be doing these things and for various reasons are not able to. And as a result, it feels as though actually, there are very high levels of burnout at the moment and lots of people in the fundraising world feeling sort of very pressured and unable to deliver. What can be done, do you think, to sort of better recognize fundraisers within organizations and give them the support they need to do the kinds of things you're talking about?
Right. So this is all connected the same way. Everything's connected to everything else that I've been talking about. So if you tell fundraisers that you need them to be raising money, bringing in new donors, helping choose the table class for the gala, figuring out, writing the thank you notes by hand, all those kinds of things. Most fundraisers are pretty intelligent people, and they're coming to this because they believe in purpose and in a mission, but they're not doing it because they can't get a job elsewhere. And so the first thing we have to do is recognize that we have these quality people around and we are churning them as quickly as we're churning donors. And because we are not paying them enough, we're not providing them with continuing education, we're not recognizing their voice. We're not even listening to them. We're just saying, you do it the way it's always been done. And I think with those organizations that say, wait a second, we can see by actual numbers and trends, we can see what's happening and that we can't do it the same way. So we're going to be part of bringing you into the discussion to decide how are we going to remake what we have now to make sure that we're here for our constituents in the future years. And that has to happen. It doesn't happen very often, but it's starting to happen a little bit. And then the next question I get when I say this from people is, but how do we start? Like I'm a mid-level fundraiser, and how do I do that? How do I get their attention? And one of the things I suggest is that they prepare really some financial models, but in really easy to understand graphics to show how, and one of the models for me that was really helpful is looking at other industries and how, if an industry finds that their churn is 80% of their people are not coming back, they're probably going to be out of business. So if you can show them that and say, we're the only sector that does that and doesn't change. And we need to do that. But I think I'm waiting for the day when some wonderful sort of somebody who does research presentations, figures out how to make that in the most simple to understand graphic way that you guys are shooting yourselves in the foot by continuing and to propagate these norms at your organization. And you actually have people in your organization already who see it and know of a way out. And that way out, or the way into the future, or into what we need to do today, is to listen to the fundraisers and give them some support. Another thing that you can do is let them see how much money it costs. The average fundraiser stays at an organization about 16 months now. So how much does it cost? Like, how long does it take to train them? How long does it take to integrate them? And then when they leave, what is your cost for having to then do that all over again every 16 months? And if they can see that actual cost to their organization, which is pretty easy to find, maybe they'll start understanding that, this is not that we're bad at choosing fundraisers, which they might say. This is because this is the nature of the beast. That 16-month thing is standard across the industry. And how can we get fundraisers to stay? And this is part and parcel of that. So it's all about sustainability. You will not be sustainable if you don't make these changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And linked to that question of supporting fundraisers appropriately, one of the things that you talk about in the book as well, I thought was really interesting at one point, is that, you said that most donors are, decent people who care about a cause and want to support it. There are unfortunately some bad actors who, behave inappropriately or make inappropriate demands or unreasonable demands. In those circumstances, how does a nonprofit give fundraisers the support that they need to be able to push back on some of that, or to say, actually, this is not okay? And at what point does an organization make the decision that it's not just pragmatism to keep the relationship going, but actually it's better just to say, this is not right and we need to end the relationship.
Yeah, it's interesting. We talk about those power dynamics with saying thank you. This is an area where I actually believe in the power dynamics a little bit. If somebody is trying to tell you that they have so much power that they're going to change the direction your nonprofit goes, or they're going to insist, if you're giving money to an educational institution, and they, for example, say, well, if we're giving you this much money, we get to decide what the curriculum is. Those, for me, are crossing red lines, and that's not acceptable. And so what I say to fundraisers and nonprofit leaders is it's okay to fire a donor. And they look at me like I'm crazy, but it's okay, because what's happening is you're spending so much time on that donor and their particular crazy needs and demands, and which are upsetting and offensive and not fair to the other donors and not fair to the organization and a waste of time and all those bad things. You're spending all that time to get that piece of money. You can get that other piece of money, that same amount of money, if not more, by just creating relationships with all these other donors who are coming in, who are treated not very well when they start. So it's okay. If for every one that's bad, there's probably 100 that are great. You just need to go find those 100 and you're going to be just fine. Do not give in to them.
Absolutely. Which I mean, yeah, I guess it's just, again, it's one of those things where it's easy. There's a sort of stick with the devil you know thing, isn't there? Where people are like, we absolutely see that, but we also know that if we just go along with it, we might get the money. So it's kind of, there's a certain amount of bravery that's required, and leadership, I guess. And maybe this goes again to what you were saying about the role of boards.
Yeah, it's bravery, it's leadership. It's also, look at what some institutions did when, Epstein was giving money and he didn't even give the money. They went through this whole thing and they said, yes, you can have this. Yes, you can have this. No single person is worth that. Nobody. I mean, I'd like to think we're all worth it, but really, if we start being obnoxious, we don't get to have different rules. It's not fair.
No, absolutely. I think that's absolutely right. Moving on to something else that I just wanted to ask you about, because I thought, again, this was really interesting in the book, that a lot of your emphasis is on the importance of fundraising as a relational role, but you also talk quite positively about recurring donations actually being something that's, useful and valuable. I just wondered if you could say a bit about why that is and how you sort of square those two things that are often seen as quite, at two ends of a spectrum.
Yeah, I am a big fan of recurring donations. And the interesting thing is that a recurring donor, there was a wonderful piece of research that came out with Neon One about 3 months ago that if your listeners haven't seen it, they should take a look at it. It's free on their website. And they queried about 150,000 nonprofits. So really huge number over a period of a couple of years. And what they found was that recurring donors are much more likely, and who are usually thought of as the little donors. You do it by mail. You don't have to pay much attention to them, that kind of thing. That is completely wrong, because what they found is these recurring donors are much more likely to give another single gift during the year when you need it. They are much more likely to stay with you. In fact, recurring donors, where the individual once a year traditional type donor will stay, I think they said 1.7 years. So some leave after 1 year, some stay a little bit longer. The recurring donors, if you have that monthly thing where you're getting a monthly, thank you or whatever it is, or you're giving monthly and you feel good about giving your 50, whatever a month, whatever it is, those people are usually, in general, staying at your organization 8 to 9 years. Which is incredible. So that's just the way of getting off that treadmill. Those people are devoted to your organization. They actually they're more sticky as time goes on, whereas the individual donors, the one-time donors, are less sticky as time goes on. And you can find all that research online. So it's not like it's a different donor or a different kind of donor. It's really just part of the whole donor landscape. And if you think of recurring giving relative to recurring to a subscription like your Netflix or whatever it is, everybody has things where they have a credit card on file and it gets charged every month. It's very difficult to pull that away. You have to have a really good reason to say, I don't want to do this anymore. And that's why a lot of these companies are making gazillions of dollars, because they realize people are once they're in, they're less likely to take it away. And with a traditional way that we're doing fundraising, it's actually the opposite of that, right? So recurring donations keep you there longer and make it harder for you to leave, whereas the one-time donations make it really easy for you to leave. And in fact, a lot of one-time donations happen because somebody's beaten the donor up so much, so to speak, that they just say, I'll just pay you to what they call it a nuisance donation. Is what people call it. Just get away from me, and I never want to hear from you again. And I'm going to block everything you send, but you have to just go away. And that doesn't happen with recurring donors. They feel, and on their end, and I am one, they feel very connected to the organization when they see, and when I see every month that, yes, you've given another, $50 in my case to whatever organization it is. And then you don't have to recognize them all the time. They can get a receipt, which typically I don't consider a receipt as a thank you note, but they can get a receipt that says, very nice, thank you for continuing to donate to our cause. And in many cases, what works really well is creating a name for them, because they like to feel part of a club, because we are the ongoing sustainers. And a lot of times people think the sustainers are only the people who give millions of dollars, but really these people, they're giving you money day in, day out. As your summertime isn't raising enough money, their money is still coming in. And it's been an extremely useful tool that unfortunately there's an idea, this is sort of an archaic idea that, well, if we let people give monthly, it's a lot lower amount, so they're not going to give annually. And they've now proven that that's not true. So we just have to look at numbers and look at the research and think about ourselves and how would we feel if we were doing that, because every fundraiser, everybody I know has some sort of recurring credit card on file somewhere situation. So we just need to look at reality and then realize, you'll quickly realize that, oh, well, our assumptions about us not needing to spend any time on recurring donors is just wrong.
Yeah, really interesting. And another thing that you talk about as well, in terms of somewhere where maybe at the moment fundraisers or most fundraisers don't quite kind of understand or maybe missing a trick, is around donor advised funds. Which is, I guess there's two bits of this. The one side is there's a whole wider debate about donor advised funds and some criticism of them around, concerns that there's a huge amount of sort of warehousing going on and that money's going into them and not out again. But is your point in the book is that maybe in part that's because fundraisers aren't actually offering people sufficient opportunities to spend the money out, and they don't know how to tap into daft donors. Maybe you could say a bit about that.
Yeah, I think it's a pretty crazy thing, and that's exactly the way you just described it. But first of all, I don't believe that just in the same way we talked earlier about there's some bad actors in giving who demand certain things. There's some bad actors who have donor advised funds. There's bad actors in the world among fundraising professionals. There's bad actors everywhere. It's a small percentage. Most people who have donor advised funds are absolutely not putting it there to warehouse money. They are not there because they don't want it going to charity. They're putting it there because they have had some sort of windfall or bonus or something along those lines. And they want to think, seriously think about where can we put this money where it's going to cause the most impact. Where do we want it to go? And just because you just got that bonus doesn't mean that you already have that research ready to go and you've decided where you want it to go. So it gives them time to make those decisions. I do think that people who don't get the money out in a certain period of time, meaning several years, I think that is a smart idea. I think if you are going to keep it there for 10 years and you never give a donation, that should be prohibited. I totally agree with that. But the part about not welcoming donor advised funds, I personally have had several experiences recently where I've really put my foot down and said, if you don't put your tax ID number and the address where the money goes on your collateral, and if your collateral says you have to call somebody or email them, I will not give to you because my money comes from my donor advised fund. And it is so easy to do that you just need to pay attention. You can't make me jump through hoops to give you money. You can try, but I'm not going to do it. So I actually have somebody who I told, I said to her, she wanted me to give money for it was a sponsorship for dinner. And I said, I will do it, but I know that you, and I'm telling the fundraiser, I know you are aware that you need to have that information on the paperwork. It's 2 lines of copy. It's nothing. You need to make that on your site so that I can immediately check the box and say, I'm sending it in via my donor advised fund. Instead, I go through these sites and I put in all the information, hoping that at the end, this is online, hoping that at the end it's going to say, check the box if you're sending in a check or to your donor advised fund, and then it's not there, and it says I have to call somebody, and I'm not going to do it. So I told her, I said, you need to change that, and if you don't do it, it's an easy change, but if you don't do it, I will not give you the money that I'm planning on sending you. And it's been 6 months and they haven't done it yet.
Yeah, and do you see any signs that that this might be shifting? I guess because all the figures certainly in the US are that the growth of DAFs has been absolutely phenomenal. Do you think there's more of an awareness within the fundraising profession that this is an area that they need to kind of focus on more?
Yeah, it's unfortunate. There's an awareness, which is great, but the awareness is, oh, there's all those people who have a bunch of money that they're warehousing and we need to get to it. And they're covering up the names of their organizations and they're trying to do it secretly, which, by the way, all the research that we're seeing, there's a little of it being done now, disproves that. But how do we get into them? We want someone to give us a list of all the funds so we can go solicit them all day long. And that's not okay. I think that's offensive too. So I wish that they were saying there's all this money there. One out of every, I think they said about 27% of all individual donations now are coming through donor advised funds. And so, yes, we have to pay attention to it, but all we have to do is include a little box on our forms. All we have to do is not make it easy for them to give. And I don't think that's asking a lot, but I do not see it moving anywhere near as quickly as it should.
I'm aware that we're almost out of time. I just wanted to ask finally, just on the sort of the wider context for the book and the work that you're doing around fundraising. It feels as though in the last certainly couple of years that the whole area of fundraising has become a bit more polarized or kind of more contentious because there's a whole debate that's happening between, I guess to characterize them to extremes, a school of thought that says actually it should be about the donor, put the donor front and center, think about what they want and kind of just do what you can to meet that. And then there's another school of thought increasingly saying, actually, no, we need to go radically in the other direction and actually, say it's not at all about donors. We need to decenter donors entirely. And, yes, they should give, but they shouldn't expect, their wishes to be paid, taken into account. We shouldn't have to say thank you to them, all that sort of stuff. And what do you make of that sort of debate between, the donor-centric view and the community-centric view? Do you think there is something useful in there in that middle ground, or do you think there's a danger that it's kind of turning this into an area where it's difficult for people to find common ground?
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes from the frustration that it's not easier to raise money. And so we're just going to blame. So let's blame people on both sides. Let's blame this person or say that we have to get beaten up by a donor who's being inappropriate or whatever. I think this is completely just general thinking about human nature. And the best way I can suggest to do that is to think about yourself as a donor. Everybody is a donor. Everyone's given something at some point. It doesn't matter how much money you have. You've given something. You volunteered. You've done whatever. So what would you want it to be? Would you want to be pandered to on one side, or would you want to be told they won't say thank you on the other side? You wouldn't want either of those. I think if we went and queried, 1 million people, 999,000 of them would say, well, that's ridiculous. Of course, we would want to be thanked, and we also wouldn't want to be pandered to. So I think I see a lot of that one side or the other thing is kind of noise. And I wish that the energy that was being put into arguing was put into change instead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Lisa, it's been absolutely great to talk. Before I finally let you go, is there anything beyond the book? Obviously, I'll put links in the show notes to that and places where people can find you and your website. But are there any particular things you've got coming up that you want to alert people to or let people know about?
Well, I'll be speaking. I speak all the time, probably every week or so there's something on. So if you go to my website at lisagreer.com, lisagreer.com, you'll be able to find out about my books. You'll be able to find out where I'm going to be presenting, what webcasts are coming up and podcasts and in-person events, those kinds of things. I also do a tip of the week every Tuesday that comes out, and it's completely free. You can sign up for that. You can also sign up for our regular newsletter, which at the premium level, which is not very expensive, allows you to have really a personal conversation in a very small group with me every month. And we do have quite a few people from the UK who are part of that.
Great. All right. Well, I'll put links to in the show notes to places where people can find all of that, and I definitely recommend that they do. But just remains to say thanks ever so much for finding the time to come on the podcast, and certainly, wish you all the best with it, and hopefully at some point we will manage to meet in person in the future.
I would love that. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Okay, great. Well, my thanks again to Lisa for finding the time to come on the podcast. It was really interesting to have a chance to talk to her. I'll put links in the show notes, as promised, to places where you can find more about Lisa's work and her books and any upcoming events. I'll put some links to things that I've written that might be of interest. In general, if you're interested in philanthropy and civil society issues, do check out the website at whyphilanthropymatters.com, where you can find articles, news updates about things I've been doing, all the back issues of this podcast, and much, much more. If you're interested in keeping in touch with me more broadly, do follow me on social media. Best place is probably LinkedIn these days, although I'm considering giving Blue Sky a bit more of a go after sort of initial exploratory effort a year or so ago. So maybe get in touch with me on there, and that might encourage me to do that a little bit more. If you've got ideas for people that I could talk to on the podcast or themes that we could cover in the future, do drop me a line. The email address is there on the website. I do my best to reply to those emails. I will promise that I'm not always entirely brilliant at doing that, so please feel free to follow up if you feel as though you've sent me an email at some point in time and I haven't got back to you. Other than that, just like, subscribe, tell all your friends about it, leave us a nice review on wherever you get your podcasts, and we'll see you next time. Bye!